This lecture will be a simple introduction to HTML. We'll talk about what it is and take a look at some very simple syntax, which will include tags and attributes. So what is HTML? It's a markup language for creating web documents or web pages. And it stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it uses a set of markup tags. Okay, so an HTML tag is the basic building block of HTML. Now, it's important to stress that HTML is not a programming language. You may hear some people refer to it as one, but it's not. It's a markup language. There's no logic in HTML. It's only used to display content. So if we think of a programming language like Java, C++, or even PHP, these languages are much more in depth and they have conditionals, they have loops, variables. HTML doesn't have those things. All right, now when we start getting into HTML5, there are certain dynamic parts of the standard, but it works with JavaScript, which handles those dynamic parts. And JavaScript is a programming language. To be more specific, it's a scripting language. All right, so we'll get into all that later. But HTML itself is a markup language. So as I said, HTML tags are the building block of HTML. They define HTML elements, which is an individual component of an HTML document or a web page. So something like a form is an HTML element, or even a paragraph or a list. Keywords, HTML tags are keywords surrounded by angle brackets, and I'm sure you've all seen them. All right, so here's a really simple example of a paragraph. It's surrounded in paragraph tags, which is just a P tag. And you can see the beginning tag has a less than, and then P, and then greater than. And then the ending tag is the same, except it has this slash before the P. So here's an example of an HTML page structure. We have the doc type at the top. The doc type basically declares what version of HTML or XHTML we're using, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Then you can see we have our HTML tags, which wrap the entire document, and then we have two areas. We have a head area and a body area. So the head is where we can provide information about the document. So you can see in this case we have a title here that says my web page, but this is also where we can include links to CSS files or JavaScript files. This is where we can put metadata, keywords, descriptions, things like that. And this stuff won't show up in the actual web page. The title will show up in the tab. Okay, when we open a browser, we usually have a tab, and that'll show there, but anything else isn't going to show up unless you view the source code. All right, and then we have the body, which is, of course, where we put the visible page content. In this case, we just have a paragraph. All right, so this is a very simple web page, but it is, in fact, a full web page. So here's some common doc type declarations. Now the first one is what we'll be working with mostly. This is an HTML5 doc type. You can see we just have the word doc type and then HTML. If we wanted to use HTML4, we could use this doc type, which you can see is a little longer. That's because we need to specify the DTD, or document type definition. In this case, this is transitional, so we have to follow a certain set of rules. There's also strict, which we can make our rules a little more strict. And this has to do with things like self-closing tags, or certain attributes we can and can't use. And then we also have XHTML, which stands for Extensible Hypertext Markup Language, and this is part of the XML markup family. All right, so XHTML is much more strict than HTML5. All right, and you can also specify transitional or strict. So closing tags, not all tags have closing tags. So if we look at paragraph, that does. It has an open tag and a closing tag. Now some tags can close themselves, such as a line break. So in this example, you can see we just have one BR. We don't have the closing tag with the slash. Now you can use self-closing tags, such as this line break. You can see we have a slash here. This is needed for XHTML. So if you're if you're writing XHTML and you use the XHTML doc type, then you want to make sure that you have your slashes and your self-closing tags. Alright, so here's some common tags. Very basic. We have paragraph, headings, which we have H1 through H6, H1 being the biggest, H6 being the smallest heading. Links, we'll use an A tag. Images, use IMG. We have unordered and ordered lists, and then list items, which are LI tags. We have table, form, input, button, line break, horizontal rule, which will put a line across the page or across the element, division or div tags, which are used to separate your markup, and you can add classes and IDs, which we'll get into later. And then of course our structure tags like HTML, head, body, and then the strong tag is used to increase the font weight of the text. So attributes, tags can also have attributes which include extra bits of information about that tag or element. Attributes appear in the tag inside of quotation marks. So this is the syntax here. You can see we have a tag, and then we're going to have the name of the attribute and then set that to whatever we want the value to be. So in this example here, we're using an A tag, which represents a link, and we have an attribute called href or href, and we're setting that to google.com. So that's how we can get the browser to know that this is a link going to google.com. Now, attributes can use double quotes or single quotes, but usually you're going to use double quotes. That's what you'll see from the most part, but single quotes will also work. All right, and then here we just have an H1, and we're using the attribute ID, which is used to identify certain elements for CSS or for maybe for JavaScript or jQuery, whatever it may be. All right, and we're just setting that to my heading. All right, and we'll be looking at attributes throughout this section. Now we also have block level elements and inline elements. Okay, now block level, they always start on a new line and they take up the full available width. So here's some examples of block level elements. Excuse me, we have div, H1 through H6, paragraph tags, form tags. These are block level, meaning that if we put something inside, let's say an H1 tag, it's going to go across the whole page. All right, and whatever we put after that is going to go on the next line. And then we have inline level elements, which do not start on a new line, and they take only the width necessary for the element. So span, A tags, images, these will all stay on the same line. All right, so we can put two spans next to each other, and in the browser they'll display right next to each other on the same line. If they were divs or another block level element, they'd be on separate lines. So creating a web page, just a simple HTML web page, is very, very simple. We need to use a text editor or an IDE to create our HTML document. So you could use Notepad for Windows or TextMate for Mac, or something more advanced. There's NetBeans, there's Adobe Dreamweaver. There's all kinds of IDEs and complicated software you can use, but of course you can just use Notepad, which is you can't get much more simple than that. Okay, all you have to do is add in your elements and tags and attributes, all your HTML code, and then save the file with a .html extension. And then you can simply open it up in a browser such as IE or Google Chrome or Firefox, and there's no server needed. HTML is completely viewable right on a client. You don't need to have some kind of web server. Just simply open the file with a browser. Alright, so those are the very, very basics of HTML. In the next video, we're going to jump into our editor, and I'm going to give you some examples. We'll take a look at some of the syntax, and we'll go from there.